सहस्रशीर्षा पुरुषः सहस्राक्षः सहस्रपात् स भूमिं विश्वतो कृत्वा अत्यतिष्ठद्दशाङ्गुलम्.
Thank you for joining us once again in Light of the Vedas. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. So we're continuing to discuss the Vedic religion and the various stages of life at which one moved. We're discussing the brahmachari, or the monk, when the children of the society, they go and live in the ashram of the guru. And there the guru trains them very strictly in the Vedas, in memorizing the Vedas as well as the philosophy. And the guru engages them in service, and it's by that service that they understand the philosophy. They put it into action. And the guru also sends them out begging for the sustenance of the school. And whether they be the son of a king or the son of a priest, it doesn't matter. They go door to door and they beg for simple things like rice and fruits. And it is by this begging that they learn the essential quality of humility, as well as detachment and satisfaction with whatever is given. And so the teacher continues to instruct the students. And again, every day they're memorizing these Vedic literatures and chanting them, chanting the Samhita, or the actual texts themselves. And by chanting them, they don't forget them. They'll never forget them for the rest of their life. And then they use those same mantras as adults to perform the various fire rituals, which are their duties and the very center of their religion. And so the teacher, while training the students, he's also watching them. He's watching how they do service. He's seeing their tendencies. And by recognizing these tendencies, then he'll also guide them in their future career. It's just like I remember being in high school, and then one day it was kind of like, they called us all into the library and they made us take these tests, and it took all day. And we were supposed to decide what we're going to do with our life. like you're supposed to take this test, and you fill out this packet, and it tells you, what your propensities are. I think they even had folders like with hundreds of different occupations, and it was meant to line you up with an occupation, and then you're set, right? So within the Vedic system, that's not how they do it. The teacher will watch the child from their childhood, and we'll see, what are the qualities of this child. What are his tendencies and how he does his service. Say, for example, their service is to clean the ashram, the home of the guru. They're meant to sweep and mop it. And so, over time, the teacher sees that one of the children, he's simply, the entire time he's sweeping, all he does is talk about the Vedic literatures. He goes over the classes that were recently there. He's talking about the Upanishads, the spiritual portion of the Vedas. He's very enthusiastic and, just absorbed in it, and he loves teaching the other students. So much so that it's like, it's almost like cleaning the floor with him is like having another class. And so the teacher sees that this is a Brahmin by nature, or a priest. He has this propensity to teach. Or you might have, say, there's another boy is sent out into the forest, and he's meant to collect firewood with some of his fellow monks. And maybe there's a wolf or something, or a tiger within the jungle. And immediately, as soon as they hear, a twig snap, or there's some danger, some fear, the birds become quiet and fly from the trees. Immediately, he takes his staff, his walking stick, and assumes a position of protection, and he's going to protect the other boys. And maybe a tiger does emerge from the forest, and he calls for all the other boys to run back to the ashram, but he doesn't run. And he won't turn his back on the tiger. Rather, he'll back away slowly, facing the tiger, and he's even eager to fight the tiger, and all the other boys run back to the guru. Guru Dev, teacher, he's out there fighting the tiger. So then, the teacher comes and, banging a pot or whatever, and scares the tiger away. And he recognizes, this young boy, he has the nature of a warrior, right? Or maybe you have another boy, he's meant to also clean, he's meant to or he's meant to garden or something. He's meant to water the various plants in the garden and help in the farm. And maybe he really loves the farming. And then maybe he also starts doing business. He starts exchanging with the other students, like, I'll give you so much of this particular type of sweet if you do this for me. And then he sets up like a network of exchange, on the schoolyard, where he's paying off all the different students to do various things for him, and all of a sudden he starts to become very wealthy, at least more than the other children. So this might be a businessman by nature. So in this way, it's an important part of their life as monks that the teacher's assessing and see sort of where should they go in life. And so, and while all of this is going on, they're learning the Vedas and memorizing them. And so sometime around their teenage years, there's a ritual known as Keshanta, where their heads are shaved again, but only if they want to. You see, there's an element of choice here. It's sort of like the Catholic concept of confirmation, where during the baptism you essentially became a Catholic and you took up the religion, again, against your will, basically. But now that you're an adult and you're, say 16 or 15 years old, now that you're old enough to really, at least put in a very, according to your ability, you're able to understand what the spiritual knowledge given to you is, then it's like left to you. You can either reject it if you want, or you can take it up as an adult in full consciousness of your actions, and should you choose to, then you shave your head again, as you did earlier when you're initiated into the Vedas, and this is a sign that now you accept this of your own free will. And so you continue your studies in the Gurukul, and eventually you graduate, and then you're known as a Snataka, and you sometimes a Snataka or a recently graduated student will tour the land. And the Vedic literatures talk about how he's honored, like even a king, when he sees a Snataka who's like probably, a 17, 18-year-old boy walking on the road, should step aside. He's like given great reverence and affection. So it's like his graduation day. And then he'll begin his occupation. And this may be, he joins with his father, or becomes, a businessman in the village, or a warrior, or a king, or whatever it may be, whatever occupation he's going towards. And he starts to become trained in that. And except for the educational class, like the priest, that boy who is teaching all the other kids, he might stay there and live with the guru for longer, sometimes until he's 25 years old or so, because he's specializing in teaching. He's specializing in conveying transcendental knowledge. And he himself may have a gurukul, when he's of age. So after this kind of educational period, then the big ritual comes, which is marriage, right? This is actually the biggest ritual within the Vedic culture. It's the most elaborate of all the rituals. And so ideally, the couple has known each other their entire lives. The boy may be in his early 20s, or maybe up to 25 years old is considered ideal for a man to be married. And the woman will generally be in her late teens, 16 to 18, that sort of period. And so, but they've known each other since they were 4 or 5 years old. This is intimate village life. So they would be playing in the dirt, when they're 2 or 3 years old or something, making mud patties, right? I mean, you can imagine how nice it would be to be married to someone that you were friends with since as long as you can remember, since you were little kids, like you'd run and play tag together and stuff. So that's a very sweet kind of marriage, where they're friends through childhood and teenage years, and then they actually become husband and wife, and that forms a very deep bond, and especially if you're virgin at birth and you never had any relationship before, then when the husband and wife come together, they're very dedicated and devoted to each other. It's a lifelong partnership. And also included within that is astrology. Astrology is used to judge very carefully the compatibility of a husband and wife, because it's a partnership. You really have to work together and cooperate in a give and take relationship that will last the majority of your life. And so, as I mentioned, it's one of the most lavish rituals. And so another interesting point about this ritual is that it is a fire ritual. There's a fire sacrifice at the center of it, and yet that fire is very special. You don't put that fire out. That fire is brought home like in a pot, and it's installed in the kitchen, like it's given its own little place in the kitchen. And then that fire is used to cook all the meals as long as that couple is married. And that fire is used, they also take that fire and use it to perform the daily sacrifices, the fire sacrifices that would be performed in the house. So it's used for cooking and it's used for sacrifices. So it's kind of like the hearth fire. It becomes the hearth fire of the home. and it accompanies the couple throughout their life together. And it's a sacred fire. And then if the wife happens to die before the husband, then he'll use that same fire to cremate her body. So it's kind of like that fire is closely associated with the wife herself, and the love between them. So the life of the householder, the householder, essentially when he wakes up in the morning, when the man wakes up, he's responsible to perform certain rituals, and he does a daily fire sacrifice in his house. In fact, within the Vedic culture, there's the understanding of karma, and so one has to be careful not to accumulate sinful karma. And a householder is considered to have 5 things which he does, which accumulates bad karma. It's basically the hearth, the fire itself, which is burning there in the kitchen or in the front room. That's considered to accumulate bad karma because different insects and things may fly into it. So inevitably there's little beings, little creatures that die in that fire. Also there's the grinding stone, the cooking that's done in the kitchen. Inevitably there's different types of insects and things that die. When you're sweeping the house and cleaning, there's going to be death. And then also when you're collecting water and just sort of like going about the household chores of life, then inevitably you're going to accidentally kill things. And because of that, you have some bad karma. So it's important that there are 5 rituals which the householder performs every day. And those are essentially, he begins his day, wakes up in the morning and performs his ablutions and bathes and offers prayers. And then he studies the Vedas. And specifically, he'll study what are known as the Brahmana portion of the Vedas. The brahmachari, or in the monk life, he was memorizing by continuously chanting the Samhita, the actual text of the Vedas themselves, like the Rig Veda mantras. But as a householder, he's really studying and absorbing himself in the Brahmana portion of the Vedas, which is basically like the rituals of how to perform sacrifices, the rituals of how to practice cleanliness, essentially the structure of how to actually go about these yajnas, or these fire sacrifices, and the whole lifestyle that surrounds these fire sacrifices. And so he's going to study that, and he's also going to study, other portions of the Vedas as well, philosophy and different stories and things like that. So he's going to study the Vedas every day, and then he's going to perform his personal daily sacrifice on behalf of, his family. It'll perhaps even be in his home. He performs a small sacrifice, just done by himself. And he sacrifices to the gods. He chants mantras to the gods. And this is meant to satisfy them. So studying the Vedas and studying the mantras of the Vedas, this is paying a debt to the sages who actually gave the Vedas into human society. And when you perform a sacrifice to the gods, you're essentially saying thank you to them and paying them for all the things that they give us, such as nice light, sunlight and good crops and water and rain and all these different things that we're considered dependent upon them for. And so it's basically saying thank you to them by performing that sacrifice. And then also there'll be an offering to the forefathers, to one's parents, grandparents, ancestors who have died. There may be a little altar to the ancestors. And so you'll perform a little ritual, which you're considered to be paying the debt for the body that they have given you. And then there's an offering to the beings in general, which is essentially, it's like you take a little bit of the food you're going to eat and you scatter it on the ground. And it's considered to sort of offer thanks to just the general living beings within the world, and even the subtle ones, such as spirits and subtle gods and ghosts and whatever it is that we can't see. You're essentially offering something to them to say thank you, because we don't exist as individuals. We exist within a symbiotic relationship with the entire world. So there's a sense in which you have to give respect, not only to the Vedas, the sages, to the gods, and to your ancestors, but just to all living beings. And there's other rituals that one may perform too. One may go outside and feed the animals, like feed cows and things like that, or one may invite a stranger, a mendicant or something is walking down the road, and you may invite them into your home to take a meal, you feed them. This is considered one of the duties of the householder, to give charity and to try to sustain everyone else in society, not only human beings, but even animals. So there'll be the sense in which one is giving to the world. And so this is an important part of their daily ritual. And so the householder or the married man and woman, they go through these rituals every day, and thus they give thanks to all the things that are given to them. And it also purifies them of the sins that are accrued just by living a normal life within a house. So in addition to these daily sacrifices, which are generally performed in the morning and evening, it might take like an hour or so, he continues to chant his Gayatri mantra, which we spoke about before. He performs a certain ritual, purifying himself and then calling down the mantra, worshipping the mantra, and then begins chanting the mantra quietly to himself. He'll chant it when the sun is rising and when the sun is above head at the midheaven. And finally, when the sun is setting, and he'll chant, it could be 108 mantras, or he might chant 1,008 mantras, whatever his particular vow may be. And this is meant to purify the consciousness and keep one in a spiritual state of mind. And then, in addition to that, the householder will perform his duties, of working his job, basically. And he continues in this way and raises children, and then sends trains his children, or his or her children, to come into the same sort of lifestyle. And then as one becomes older, when one gets around 50, 60 years old, then one begins to retire from active life. You're basically grandpa and grandma, right? And just as we see today that grandpa and grandma, oftentimes they'll sell the house and they'll buy an RV and they'll travel around, America or something. So in the same way, the householder couple, the husband and wife in their old age, they'll spend time with their grandparents and stuff, pinching cheeks and kissing foreheads and all that stuff. But then they'll also go out and start traveling. They'll retire. They'll stop working, and they'll just go retire and travel to the holy places. Or they may spend more and more time in the forest, just like you might have a retirement home, like a simple cabin out in the woods or something. So they'll go out there and they'll start meditating, and they'll start their spiritual practice more sincere. They're sort of quieting down their material life and absorbing more in the spiritual life. And just as the brahmacharis studied the mantras and memorized them, and the householders studied the brahmanas, or the texts dealing with rituals, so now in this stage of life, which is called vanaprast, or living in the forest, meditating in the forest, they will now study what are called the aranyakas, which are texts which take those ritual texts they've been practicing for decades now, all these mantras they've been chanting and all these fire sacrifices to the gods and stuff, and it will teach a sort of deeper metaphysical meaning behind it. It's kind of starting to show the deeper spiritual truths of all the things that they've been practicing. And because they've practiced a very pious life, these truths are sort of illuminated within them. They're very capable of understanding these things, as well as entering into a more peaceful meditation-based life. And then as they grow older together, the husband may become more inclined to spiritual life. And generally this is only among the brahmanas, or those who are priests and intellectuals. The husband may desire to become what is called a sannyasi. He's essentially a traveling preacher, and therefore seeking the blessings of his wife and his family. Then he'll start to live separately. And at first he'll live kind of close to their house, and then gradually he'll start to move closer and closer to the forest. He may have interactions with them, but gradually he's becoming more of a traveling preacher. And so then he'll travel and preach, and he lives essentially by begging. He has no personal possessions. And he just travels from home to home, and he begs for his food, and he develops relationships with the people, and then he teaches them spiritual knowledge. And he's considered to be, such a sannyasi is considered to be the most respected person in the society. And this is something I find fascinating about the Vedic culture, is that the sannyasi is the head of society. He's higher than the king. He's higher than any kind of leadership. He is the most respected and the most listened to. So, in contrast with modern society where, the most wealthy person is the most respected. So in that society, it's actually the person who has nothing, who's basically just walking practically in rags. The only thing he owns is a walking stick and a couple rags, and he begs for his food from door to door. This is the individual in charge of society. But he doesn't manage things or tell people what to do. He just gives them spiritual knowledge. So he's like an itinerant priest, who just wanders and befriends people and tries to enlighten them. So it's very fascinating. So this is really the goal of the Vedas, the Vedic literatures, to bring one to this level of consciousness, of total detachment and knowledge. And at that stage, the individual will then study the final section of the Vedic literature, which are the Upanishads, which deal specifically with transcendence. What is Brahman? What is the soul? What is the nature of the world? It's philosophy dealing with spiritual truth. And so that is really the heart of the Vedic literature, the Upanishads. And then, of course, Srila Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedic literatures, or the compiler of the Vedic literatures, then he has also written the Vedanta Sutra, which is a kind of commentary on the Upanishads. He's sort of talking about them, comparing them to each other, and looking at the various arguments, and dissecting and understanding the truth of the Upanishads. And so then, hopefully, as one enters this final stage of life, absorbed in spiritual knowledge, then when one leaves, one attains liberation from matter, one attains freedom from samsara, or enlightenment. And that's really the goal of the entire culture. It's not to become wealthy or powerful or beautiful or any kind of these types of goals, but rather the goal is to attain liberation from matter at the time of death. And the whole entire culture from the time of birth is building up to that. And at the time of death, then, there is the final ritual associated with the body. And the first ritual, of course, was to bring the body into life. But now we see the ritual of bringing the body to death. And so the body is burned, and certain mantras and things like that are chanted for the purification of the departed. But the body is burned for three reasons, essentially. One is so that the individual, if they don't attain enlightenment, they won't become attached to the body as a ghost, Oftentimes, like we see the trope, that the graveyard is a haunted place, because it is. And because when individuals who are not detached from their body, who are absorbed in their body and identify with it, when they die, if the body is still there, they may stay with the body. And they may, hold on to it and cling to it, even though it's rotting within a coffin. So therefore, the body is burnt so that the ghost does not become attached. The ghost has to move on and take birth again, essentially. And another reason is to pure, so that it's pure. The environment is pure, because dead bodies that aren't burned, they'll rot. Especially in a tropical environment like India, you have to be very careful to get rid of the bodies as soon as possible. So burning them is a very healthy way of getting rid of the body. And then finally, there's the detachment of the family. The family is expected to attend the funeral, and then, especially you have the son, or those who are trying to develop spiritual consciousness. It's expected that they would actually watch the burning of the body and sit there and, you watch your father's body being burned. This may seem very extreme, but it's actually a very powerful way of learning detachment. When you think that your father's the body, and you identify him with the body rather than the spirit soul within, and then you're sitting and watching that body burn, it makes you feel like afterwards. It's called smarshan vairagya. Smarshan means like a burning ghat, and so it's the renunciation that arises in the burning ghat. It's a powerful lesson for days afterwards. And oftentimes they'll shave your head, and then for days afterwards you feel like, after you've seen that, you feel, well, I just want spiritual life, like this material life is temporary. Everything that I've been striving for, all these material things, ultimately they can't make me happy. You can't take it with you. Everything I'm worrying about and anxious about and struggling about, it's all simply temporary and a waste of my time ultimately. And really what's important is me as a soul. And so that's a very powerful lesson that's there at the time of death for others.
So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us next time on Light of the Vedas.